Introduction. The cosmic radio, tuning into the station. The universe didn't go silent on you. You just never learned how to hear the way it actually responds. That moment when you look up or sit alone in a quiet room and ask for direction, for clarity, for anything that feels like confirmation that you're not moving blindly through your own life, and nothing comes back. At least nothing you can name, nothing you can point to and say, this is it. That moment has misled you more than you realize because you interpreted silence where there was actually a response. The mistake is simple, but structural. You expected a reply in words. Reality does not operate in words. It never has. Every system that governs how you experience the world, your perception, your attention, your interpretation, filters information based on patterns, not requests. Neuroscience calls this selective attention, where your brain continuously chooses what to surface and what to ignore. And once a pattern is dominant, it begins to look like reality itself rather than a filter. So when you ask for a sign but remain in the same internal state, same doubt, same tension, same background noise, you don't notice anything different. Not because nothing changed, but because nothing in your system allowed a different signal to pass through. This is where most people stopped thinking. They assume nothing is happening. They're wrong. Something is always happening. You are always receiving, but only within the range you are tuned to. The structure is closer to a radio than a conversation. Multiple signals exist at the same time, broadcasting continuously, but what you hear depends entirely on the position of the dial, and that dial is not controlled by what you want. It is controlled by what you consistently are. Your dominant thoughts, your repeated emotional states, your default interpretations, those form the frequency. And that frequency determines what becomes visible in your life. So when you say you want clarity, but stay anchored in doubt, your system filters for uncertainty. When you say you want change, but operate from fear, your perception narrows toward confirming that fear, not because anything is being withheld, but because your internal configuration has not moved. The system is not judging you. It is matching you, and it does it with precision. This is why effort alone feels inconsistent, because effort can spike temporarily, but your baseline remains unchanged, and the system always returns to baseline. Nothing mystical about it. It's how conditioning works. Over time, repeated patterns become automatic, like a dial that stays fixed even when you briefly try to turn it, snapping back the moment attention fades. So the feeling of being ignored is not absence, it is feedback. And once you see that, the entire question changes. You stop asking, why isn't anything answering me? And start asking, what am I continuously tuned to that keeps producing this? That question removes comfort, but it gives you control. Because if your experience is not random, then it is adjustable, not by forcing outcomes, not by repeating words, but by changing the position that determines what you can perceive, access, and align with. This is where the idea of signs becomes clearer. They are not rare messages sent occasionally. They are moments where your internal state shifts just enough to detect something that was always there. Patterns, timing, coincidences that feel too precise to ignore. Not because they suddenly appeared, but because for a moment your filter loosened. Then it closes again, and the signal disappears. Not externally, internally. That is the cycle most people live in. Brief alignment, then return to default. This book is about breaking that cycle, not by chasing those moments, but by stabilizing the position that makes them possible. Because the system is already active, the signal is already present, the response is already happening. The only variable left is where you are tuned. Chapter 1. Silence is the signal, clearing the channel. The reason you can't hear anything is not because nothing is speaking, but because your mind has never actually been quiet long enough to receive what is already there. Imagine stepping into a vast Gothic cathedral, ancient stone rising into shadow, colored light pouring through stained glass, the air heavy with incense, the kind of space where silence itself feels alive. And yet the moment you enter, that presence collapses. Because instead of stillness, you find chaos, voices colliding, vendors shouting through megaphones, music clashing out of tune, phones ringing without pause, screens flashing from every column until the sacred becomes indistinguishable from a marketplace. Now place yourself in the center of that noise, trying to kneel, trying to whisper something real, something that matters. something that requires an answer. And ask yourself honestly whether anything you say could travel cleanly through that environment, or whether any answer, no matter how precise, could reach you without being distorted, buried, or completely lost. That cathedral is your mind. That market is your life. And that noise is the real reason you think nothing is answering you. Because the problem is not that the signal is weak. The problem is that your internal static is overwhelming. Most people believe that learning to connect with something greater requires more knowledge, more techniques, more complex language. But the first requirement is the opposite. You don't need new words. You need less noise, not just externally, but internally, because the constant narration in your head, the commentary, the judging, the anticipating, the worrying, is not passive. It is an active broadcast that fills the channel completely. And modern life amplifies that condition. You wake up, and before your feet touch the ground, you are already consuming input, notifications, messages, news from places you have never been. Then you move through the day surrounded by sound, eating with screens, driving with audio, working with background noise, and falling asleep with a device still in your hand, not because you need it, but because silence has become uncomfortable. That discomfort is not random. Silence removes distraction. And when distraction disappears, certain truths surface about your work, your relationships, your fears, the parts of your life that do not align with what you tell yourself. And rather than face that, you increase the volume of everything else. Noise becomes anesthesia. But here is the paradox most people avoid. The same place where discomfort appears is the same place where clarity exists. The system does not separate them. So if you continuously avoid silence, you are not just avoiding discomfort, you are also avoiding access. Because the signal you are trying to hear does not compete, it does not shout, it does not repeat itself to match your level of noise. It waits. And if you never create space, you never detect it. This is not abstract. It is structural. Your brain operates through electrical patterns, and most of your day is spent in high-frequency beta activity, a state associated with action, stress, and outward focus. Useful for survival, but inefficient for reception, because in that state you are projecting, reacting, generating output. Lower states, alpha and theta, shift that pattern. Alpha, a relaxed but aware state, acts as a bridge. Theta, deeper and slower, is where insight, intuition, and integration occur. So when you try to ask for guidance while anxious, stressed, or mentally overloaded, you are operating in a state designed to emit, not receive, like trying to download a large file through a weak connection while the line is already occupied. The signal may be there, but your system cannot process it cleanly. And when nothing registers, you assume nothing responded. But the system did respond. You just couldn't catch it. So the first skill is not interpretation. It is lowering the noise. And that begins with recognizing the difference between two types of signals inside you. The first is the voice of the ego, the familiar one, loud, repetitive, urgent, often driven by fear or justification, constantly explaining, arguing, pushing, located in the head, leaving tension or confusion behind. The second is different. It is quiet, direct, often appearing once, without explanation, without pressure, felt more as a recognition than a thought, leaving a sense of clarity even when the direction it suggests is difficult. One pushes, the other indicates. If the channel is crowded, you will follow the louder one. Not because it is correct, because it is audible. So clearing the channel means learning to ignore volume and start detecting precision. And that requires deliberate reduction. Not permanently withdrawing from life, but creating controlled spaces where input stops. A simple structure exposes the mechanism. The first hour after waking, before any external input, before screens, before conversation, before information. Just stillness, observation, your own breathing, the environment as it is. Initially, the system resists because it is conditioned to stimulation. But after a short period, something shifts. The intensity of thought decreases. The background noise drops. And within that space, something appears. An idea, a solution, a connection that was not accessible before. Not because it was created, because the channel cleared. And if the channel is too saturated for silence alone, you externalize the noise. Writing without structure, without filtering, without editing, removes surface-level thoughts from the system, freeing capacity, allowing deeper patterns to emerge once the clutter is removed. The mechanism is simple. clear the buffer, then detect the signal. The same principle extends beyond the mind. Natural environments operate at slower, more stable rhythms, and when you enter them, forest, ocean, open space, your system begins to synchronize, reducing internal noise without effort, not because nature is calming in a poetic sense, but because your system adjusts to a more ordered field. You call it peace. It is alignment. And there is one more layer that blocks most people. Certainty. The assumption that you already know what the answer should look like. That rigidity fills the channel as effectively as noise because it leaves no space for anything different to enter, turning what should be a dialogue into a demand. So nothing new appears, not because it isn't available, because there is no space for it. The shift begins when that certainty drops, when the position changes from control to openness, from this must be the way to I don't see the full structure, and in that moment space is created. And systems fill space, not symbolically, structurally. The same applies at the edge of sleep. As your brain transitions from active states into slower patterns, the channel naturally clears, and whatever occupies that space just before sleep influences what follows. So if the system is filled with noise, it remains saturated. But if space is created, the system reorganizes. No belief required, only state change. So the method remains consistent across every layer. Less noise, more space. And within that space, something becomes detectable. Not because it arrived, because it was never absent. And once you experience that clearly, even once, the idea that nothing is answering you begins to collapse because you realize it never stopped. Chapter 2. The body as an antenna. The physical sixth sense. Your intuition isn't hidden, it's just not speaking in the language you keep expecting. Look at your own pattern closely, not in theory, but in memory. The moments where everything made sense on paper, where the arguments were clean, the logic solid, the outcome predictable. And yet something in your body resisted from the first second, a tightening you ignored, a heaviness you dismissed, a subtle no that you translated into doubt instead of data. And later, when the consequences unfolded, you didn't lack warning, you ignored it. The error is not thinking too much, it is trusting thought more than signal. Consider a simple scenario. Not abstract, but familiar. You walk down a quiet street at night and notice movement at the end of an alley. Your mind begins immediately, statistics, explanations, rationalization, the need to appear composed even in private. It's probably nothing. Don't overreact, you're projecting. But your body does not wait for permission. The skin tightens, the stomach contracts, the breath shifts, muscles load. Something in you has already registered a pattern your conscious mind has not yet organized. That gap, those few seconds, is where survival lives. If you follow the mind, you stay in analysis. If you follow the body, you move. This is not instinct versus intelligence. This is timing. The body reads before the mind concludes. And yet modern culture trains you to distrust that timing from the beginning. You are taught to override hunger, suppress tears, ignore discomfort, sit still when the body asks to move, say yes when something in you says no, and smile while your nervous system tightens. Over time, this becomes identity. You become someone who explains reality instead of sensing it. But the system underneath never stopped working. It was only ignored. The body does not speak in arguments, it speaks in signals. And the universe uses that channel because it is faster, cleaner, and harder to manipulate. You are not receiving guidance through sentences. You are receiving it through sensation, pressure, openness, contraction, warmth, resistance, calm, nausea, lightness, a subtle expansion that appears before the mind has time to approve it. That is not metaphor. It is mechanism. Your body processes far more information than your conscious mind can handle. While your thinking operates in narrow bandwidth, your nervous system is continuously scanning posture, tone, rhythm, microexpression, chemical cues, environmental patterns, internal states, and relational tension. You don't need to understand all of it. The body compresses it into one clear output: move toward or move away. And that output shows up physically. The problem is not that you don't receive it. The problem is that you translate it incorrectly. You feel contraction and call it overthinking. You feel expansion and call it excitement or randomness. You reduce signal to mood, and then you ignore it. This is why living from the neck up breaks decision-making. You turn life into a spreadsheet, pros, cons, projections, optics, while the body has already registered misalignment. And when the outcome fails, you call it bad luck. When the more accurate statement is this: the signal was there before the decision. The brain is not neutral. It is filled with bias, fear, memory, social pressure, and inherited patterns. It can justify staying in a toxic environment because the salary is high or the image is correct. But the body does not negotiate with image. It reacts, it resists, it begins to break down under what does not align. Look at how it speaks when ignored. The stomach tightens every Sunday before work. The head aches around one specific person. The chest compresses when you agree to something you don't want. Energy drops in certain environments without explanation. These are not random inconveniences. They are reports. And science is not against this idea. The enteric nervous system in your gut contains over 100 million neurons and produces the majority of the body's serotonin. It communicates directly with the brain through the vagus nerve. That phrase you dismiss, gut feeling, is not poetic language. It is neurological processing happening outside your conscious awareness. Your gut is not guessing. It is calculating faster than your mind, and it uses simple code, expansion or contraction. There is no complexity at the level of signal. When something is aligned, the body opens, breathing deepens, posture lifts, space appears internally, even if the situation is challenging. When something is misaligned, the body closes, breath shortens, muscles tighten, the system pulls inward, energy drops. This is not emotion. This is direction. And once you learn to feel it without immediately explaining it away, it becomes usable. Say something, force out loud, and notice what happens inside your body, not in your thoughts, but in your chest, your stomach, your breath. Then say something undeniably true and observe the shift. The body responds instantly. That contrast is calibration. After that, decisions stop being abstract. You begin to feel them before you justify them. There is another layer that is harder to ignore. Sometimes truth hits like electricity. You hear a sentence, or you say something without planning it, and a chill runs across your skin, from the back of your neck, down your arms, as if your body just recognized something before your mind could catch up. That reaction is not imagination. It is a moment of resonance, when an external input matches an internal pattern with precision. The body confirms it. No argument, no repetition, just a signal. And yet most people override that because it cannot be explained. The same applies to movement. Stand still, relax, remove effort, and the body begins to reveal direction in subtle ways, leaning toward what is coherent, away from what is not. This is not performance. It is micro-adjustment in the nervous system, reflecting alignment before conscious decision-making interferes. But here is where most people get trapped. Not every contraction is truth. Sometimes it is memory. Trauma can produce the same physical reaction as intuition, but the quality is different. Intuition is quiet, direct, almost minimal. It does not argue. It does not panic. Trauma is loud, chaotic, full of catastrophic projections. One is stable, the other is reactive. So before trusting the signal, you regulate the system, calm the body, let the noise drop, then check again. If the no remains clear without panic, it is likely real. If the system softens and curiosity appears, what you felt was not danger. It was growth. And if you continue ignoring the body, the signal escalates. First it whispers, then it repeats, then it disrupts, then it forces. What begins as intuition becomes tension, then symptom, then breakdown. Not as punishment, but as escalation. The system increases volume when lower levels are ignored. A sore throat appears when truth is suppressed. Digestive issues appear when something cannot be processed emotionally or physically. Pain localizes where pressure accumulates. The body is not betraying you. It is increasing clarity. There is also the matter of absorption. The solar plexus, your center of emotional processing, does not only read your internal state, it reads environments. Walk into a room after conflict and you feel it instantly. Meet someone who appears perfect, but something in your stomach tightens without explanation. That is not weakness. That is detection. The mistake is claiming everything you feel as your own. Sometimes the correct response is a question. Is this mine? If the body releases when you ask, you have your answer. And finally, the condition of the body affects the clarity of the signal. A dehydrated system conducts poorly. An inflamed system distorts input. A fatigued system misreads. Heavy digestion consumes energy that could be used for perception. This is why fasting appears across traditions, not as ritual, but as optimization. Reduce internal load, increase sensitivity. Alcohol, processed sugar, overstimulation, these are not moral issues. They are noise. You cannot expect clarity from a saturated system. So the body is not something you transcend. It is something you refine. Because the universe does not start by convincing your thoughts. It starts by shifting your state. And that shift always appears in the same place first. Not in your head, but in your body. Chapter 3. God's Algorithm, Synchronicities and Numbers. What are the odds that the moment you finally think of someone with real intensity, the phone rings with their name on the screen, or that the exact question you have been carrying in silence for 3 days is answered by a sentence falling into your hands from a book you never meant to open? You have lived moments like that. And so has almost everyone who pays even slight attention to the texture of life. Yet the mind has a reflex almost as fast as the event itself. Dismiss it, reduce it, flatten it into coincidence before it has time to disturb your worldview, because once you allow the possibility that something responded with precision, you are forced to reconsider a much larger idea, that reality may not be as mute, cold, and accidental as you were taught. This is the strange tension at the center of synchronicity. The event itself is often small, almost ordinary on the outside, but the timing is too exact. The relevance too intimate, the emotional fit too clean, and that is what makes it unsettling, because you are not reacting to the size of the event. You are reacting to the precision of the match between what was moving inside you and what appeared outside you. Think of how an ordinary digital algorithm works. It does not need to know your soul in order to shape what you see. It simply studies what you pause on, what you search for, what you ignore, what you return to, how long your eyes stay in one place, and from that pattern it reorganizes your feed until it begins to feel as though the screen is reading your mind. The universe, in the language of this chapter, functions through a similar principle, except that the field it reads is not just your clicks, but your attention, your emotion, your dominant thoughts, your fears, your expectations, and the beliefs you rehearse so often that they harden into frequency. That is why synchronicities should not be treated as random little miracles dropped from the sky for entertainment. They are feedback. They are reality reorganizing itself around what has become active within you. Not always to reward you, not always to flatter you, but often to show you, with unnerving elegance, what signal you are actually sending. Carl Jung gave this phenomenon a name: synchronicity, the meaningful coincidence of inner and outer events that do not appear to be linked by direct physical cause, yet are bound together by significance. That definition matters because it protects the subject from both superstition and reduction. Jung was not saying that every strange timing is magic, nor was he claiming that the laws of cause and effect disappear. He was pointing to something subtler, a layer of reality where meaning itself behaves like a connective force. You think of a friend you have not seen in years, and she calls. There is no visible thread from your thought to her hand picking up the phone. Yet the event lands with force because meaning bridges what mechanism cannot explain neatly. To the rational mind, this is irritating, because the rational mind prefers wires, chains, equations, and observable steps. But life keeps producing moments that are not easily contained inside that model. And the honest person eventually has to admit that explanation is not the same thing as exhaustion of mystery. Now, before the skeptic inside you protests too loudly, it is important to make one distinction. Part of what people call synchronicity is absolutely related to selective attention. Neuroscience has a perfectly respectable name for one piece of the process: the reticular activating system, the network that filters from the overwhelming flood of sensory information only what is currently relevant to your mind. If you decide to buy a red car, you suddenly start seeing red cars everywhere, not because the world manufactured more of them overnight, but because your filter changed, and your perception is now tuned to detect what previously passed unseen. That does not weaken the argument, it strengthens it. Because the question was never whether your focus changes what you see. The question is whether what you see then begins to shape your path, your mood, your decisions, your sense of guidance. And the answer is obviously yes. Attention is not passive. Attention is a selection mechanism, and selection is destiny in slow motion. What you repeatedly notice acquires weight. What acquires weight influences action, and what influences action begins to alter the structure of your life. So when repeated numbers, unusual encounters, symbolic objects, songs with impossible timing, or startlingly relevant phrases begin appearing, the shallow response is to say, "I'm just making it up." The more intelligent response is to ask, what has become active in me that reality now keeps reflecting back? That question is better because it does not require either naive mysticism or dead skepticism. It simply recognizes that there is a conversation between inner state and outer pattern, and that conversation becomes visible through timing. This is why 1111 affects people so strongly. Not because the number itself is magical in some childish sense, but because it arrives like a tap on the glass of consciousness. You glance at the clock absent-mindedly, and there it is. You open a receipt, and there it is again. You see it on a license plate, a counter, a timestamp, a door number, and after enough repetition, the experience stops feeling statistical and starts feeling intentional. In spiritual systems, 11 is often called a master number, a symbol of awakening, a gateway, two pillars standing side by side like an opening in the ordinary world. Whether or not you accept every numerological tradition, the lived effect remains. The number interrupts you, pulls you out of autopilot, and makes you examine the exact state you were in when it appeared. That is why the most useful question is not, what does 1111 mean in some universal dictionary? But, what was I thinking, feeling, fearing, or desiring at the moment it appeared? The number is not the content of the message so much as the highlighter over the sentence. It marks a point of alignment. It says, in effect, pay attention to this moment because something in you is now resonating loudly enough to surface through pattern. The same principle extends to other recurring numbers. Many spiritual traditions attach symbolic codes to them, and whether you treat those codes as literal guidance or as intuitive prompts, they can still function well if used intelligently. 111 often points to rapid manifestation, to the dangerous speed with which thought hardens into form when attention is concentrated. 222 is the rhythm of patience, balance, hidden roots growing underground before the plant appears. 333 has long been associated with guidance, support, and the presence of wiser intelligence, whether you frame that as ancestors, teachers, archetypes, or the deeper mind. 444 suggests protection and structure, the invisible beams holding the roof while you panic under it. 555 announces change, often chaotic in appearance but evolutionary in function. 666, so badly abused by superstition, is often better understood as material over-identification, a reminder that you have become too entangled in the visible layer of life. 757 feels like momentum, a kind of spiritual confirmation that a lesson is being integrated. 888 speaks the language of completion and flow. 999 marks endings, the clearing of a room before the new tenant arrives. You do not need to memorize those meanings, as if the universe were a customer service menu. What matters more is the relationship between the pattern and your felt response. If a number catches your attention strongly, first ask your body what it feels like before you ask the internet what it supposedly means. The first impression, especially when calm, is often more accurate than thousand recycled explanations written by strangers. And numbers are not the only tools the system uses. Reality is practical. It uses whatever can get through your defenses. A feather in an unlikely place can land like a whisper. A coin on the ground can feel less like money than like a symbol of provision. A song can say what no person around you has managed to say directly, because music bypasses logic and enters through emotion. An animal seen repeatedly, whether in life or in image, can function like a living symbol. Hawk for height of vision, butterfly for transformation, spider for the patient architecture of creation. The medium changes, but the principle does not. Reality will use what your mind cannot easily resist. Now, all of this becomes dangerous the moment you grow desperate. There is a thin line between living attentively and becoming spiritually neurotic. If you demand a sign for every trivial choice, or if you stare at the clock hoping to catch 1111 like a gambler waiting for a slot machine to pay out, you are no longer in conversation with the universe. You are feeding compulsion. The true synchronicity has spontaneity. It surprises you. It interrupts you. It arrives cleanly. The counterfeit version is manufactured by obsession, and obsession has a very particular emotional taste. Anxiety, urgency, interpretive stretching, the need to make it mean what you want it to mean. That is why projected signs feel unstable. A real sign tends to bring a subtle quietness, even when it carries serious instruction. It lands with a calm sense of, there it is. A projected sign gives a burst of excitement, followed by doubt, reinterpretation, and more hunger. You have to keep feeding it, because it was never strong enough to stand on its own. If you find yourself doing mental acrobatics, adding numbers on a plate, dividing them, bending the pattern until it finally resembles what you hoped for, you are not reading reality anymore. You are forcing a confession. There is, however, a sober way to ask for a sign. It begins not in desperation, but in clarity. You identify a real question, one that matters, and is not merely a way of avoiding responsibility. Then you ask for a specific symbol within a limited time frame, something clear enough that it cannot be confused with ordinary noise, and then you let it go. This last part matters more than people think. If you search frantically for the sign, you contaminate the process. Obsession is static. Receptivity requires space. If the sign appears spontaneously and unmistakably, you register it. If it does not, that absence may itself be information. Silence is not empty. Silence is often the answer you didn't want, and even then, signs do not replace adulthood. They do not exempt you from discernment, common sense, or consequence. They are not there to choose your socks, your lunch, or your every move, but to orient you when the map becomes too dense for logic alone. Most of the time, the universe does not hand you the entire blueprint. It leaves breadcrumbs. One invitation, one conversation, one odd repetition, one book that seems to find you, one person saying exactly what needed to be said. Follow that one step and the next one appears. Refuse it because you cannot see the final destination, and the path remains invisible. That is how navigation really works. The GPS in your car does not reveal the whole country at once. It gives the next turn when you are close enough to take it. Synchronicity works the same way. It is not a full disclosure of destiny. It is a directional nudge, often small, often deniable, but precise enough for the person willing to pay attention. And once you start noticing this without forcing, without fear, without trying to wring certainty out of every shadow, a quiet realization begins to form. Coincidence is not always the absence of meaning. Sometimes it is meaning arriving in a form subtle enough to preserve your freedom. That is why the universe stays anonymous. It does not compel, it hints. And if you are awake enough, that hint is more than enough. Chapter 4. Night is for working. Dream messages. If you spend a third of your life in a place you barely remember, what exactly have you been ignoring all these years? Not abstractly, literally. If you live long enough, decades of your existence disappear into something you casually call sleep, as if those hours were empty, interchangeable, disposable, nothing more than biological maintenance between two productive days. You go to bed exhausted, still carrying the residue of the day. And you wake up already pulled forward by urgency, as if nothing meaningful could possibly exist in the space between those two alarms. That assumption is the real loss, because the night is not empty. It is simply unobserved. And what is unobserved is easy to dismiss. Modern life treats sleep like a shutdown sequence, a blackout period where consciousness turns off and the body recharges like a device plugged into the wall. But that model only explains the surface layer. Yes, the body repairs. Yes, the brain clears metabolic waste, as neuroscience has shown through the activation of the glymphatic system during deep sleep. But that is only one half of what happens. The other half is harder to measure, which is why it is often ignored. When the body goes still and the rational layer softens, the part of you that filters reality during the day, judging, categorizing, rejecting what doesn't fit, loses its grip. The gatekeeper steps aside, and when that happens, information that cannot pass through your waking logic begins to move. Not as sentences, as images, as symbols, as sequences that don't follow your usual rules. This is why dreams feel strange. Not because they are meaningless, but because they are not translated. Carl Jung pointed out that the unconscious speaks in symbols, not in the language of the ego, and that distinction explains almost everything people misunderstand about dreams. The ego wants clarity, linearity, explanation. The deeper mind compresses meaning into images, associations, emotional structures that carry more information than a sentence can hold. So when you dismiss a dream because it doesn't make sense, what you are really saying is that it doesn't match the format your waking mind prefers. But that does not make it empty. It makes it encoded. The more interesting question is not why dreams are strange. It's why you don't remember them. Because you do dream every night, multiple times. What disappears is not the experience, it is the recall. And that loss is not accidental. The moment you wake up, your system shifts rapidly back into beta, high-frequency, action-oriented survival mode. Thoughts flood in immediately. Time, obligations, tasks, messages, urgency. That surge overwrites the fragile memory of the dream before it stabilizes, like writing on fogged glass and then wiping it clean in one motion. There is also resistance. The ego does not trust what it cannot control. So even when fragments remain, it reduces them. Nonsense, imagination, irrelevant, because accepting them as meaningful would require accepting a different model of how information arrives. So the first shift is simple but not easy. You treat the night as a space worth entering, not collapsing into. Because something does happen consistently when you sleep. Two processes, always present. One physical, one experiential. Physically, the body repairs, the brain cleanses, the system resets. Experientially, your sense of identity loosens. You are no longer anchored to the same narrative, and that changes what becomes accessible. Where that access leads depends on the state you bring into sleep. This is the variable most people ignore. If you enter sleep overloaded, agitated, consuming chaotic input, carrying unresolved tension, your system does not suddenly become clear. It continues processing at that level, and the result is fragmented, unstable, heavy dream activity. You wake up tired, not because you didn't sleep, but because the system remained noisy. If you enter sleep with a quieter state, calm, focused, even slightly intentional, the quality changes. Dreams become more structured, more coherent, sometimes unusually vivid. Solutions appear, patterns connect. You wake up with clarity that was not available before. Same mechanism, different input. This is not mystical, it is state-dependent processing. But not all dreams carry the same weight. If you treat them all equally, you either ignore everything or overanalyze noise. There are clear distinctions. Most dreams are discharge, residual processing of the day. Fragments of conversation, images, stress, random combinations without coherent structure. These are not messages, they are clearing. Then there are dreams that feel different immediately, sharper, more vivid, emotionally precise, with a structure that holds even after waking. They don't fade as quickly. They leave an impression that lingers. These carry information worth examining. And then there are experiences that feel even more stable. Encounters that lack the usual distortion, where the tone is calm, direct, without fear. These are not chaotic, they feel contained. The key is not to label them. The key is to recognize the difference. Because once you see that difference, you stop treating the night as noise, and you begin to use it. Which means you stop waiting passively. You can set direction before entering, not by forcing outcomes, but by placing a question into the system at the right moment. Just before sleep, when the mind is no longer fully structured but not yet unconscious, the hypnagogic state, you have a narrow window. Brain activity shifts toward data. Filters weaken. What you hold in that moment passes more directly into deeper layers. So instead of replaying the day, you place something intentional. A question. Minimal. Then you let it go. No effort, no repetition. If the system processes it, the response appears, sometimes immediately, sometimes within a short delay. But there is a condition. You must catch it. Dream memory is unstable. Seconds matter. If you move too quickly, it dissolves. So the process is simple. Record immediately. Fragments are enough, because writing stabilizes what would otherwise disappear. And interpretation follows a similar principle. Not external definitions. Internal resonance. A symbol does not have a fixed meaning across people, it carries meaning relative to your experience. So instead of searching for universal explanations, you track your response. What did it feel like? Where in your life does that pattern already exist? If the interpretation lands physically, if the body recognizes it, it is usable. If it feels forced, It is not. Nightmares follow the same structure, but with intensity. They are not random punishment. They are compressed signals that were not processed in softer forms. Avoidance repeats them. Engagement changes them. When you stop running inside the pattern, even in waking reflection, and face what the image represents, the structure updates. Because the system is not trying to scare you, it is trying to complete something. There are also states that feel threatening but are mechanical. Sleep paralysis is one of them. Awareness returns before the body exits REM matonia, leaving you conscious but unable to move. The sensation, pressure, sound distortion, visual fragments can feel invasive. But the mechanism is known. The system is still in dream mode while consciousness has partially returned. Fear amplifies the distortion, calm stabilizes it. And in that boundary state, transitions become possible, either back into sleep or into more controlled dream awareness. Which leads to the final layer. Lucid dreaming. The moment you realize inside the dream that you are dreaming. At that point, the environment becomes responsive in a different way. You are no longer following the script. You are interacting with it. The value is not in fantasy, but in recognition, seeing directly how perception shapes experience without delay. Because in that space, the feedback is immediate. Thought becomes environment. And when you return to waking life, that understanding remains, not as theory, but as memory. Reality is not as rigid as it feels, it is simply slower. So the night is not a void between days. It is a second environment, less filtered, more direct. And the more you treat it as such, the less it disappears. Because you were never unconscious in the way you assumed. You were just not paying attention. Chapter 5. The Quantum Prayer, From Beggar to Creator. Why would the universe deliver abundance to a voice that keeps introducing itself as lack? That is the hidden flaw in the way most people pray, and it is so common that it has been mistaken for devotion. They bow inwardly or outwardly, lower their energy, shrink their posture, and speak from the exact emotional state they are trying to escape. Please help me. Please give me this. Please see how much I need it. Please notice how much I'm suffering. The words may sound spiritual, but the signal underneath them is not faith. It is shortage, desperation, distance, doubt. And if the universe functions as a mirror, not as a judge but as a reflector, then the answer it returns cannot be different from the frequency it receives. Need calls more need. Lack rehearsed with intensity becomes lack stabilized. That is why so much traditional prayer fails without people understanding why. They think they are asking for help, but what they are really doing is affirming, with emotion and repetition, that the thing they desire is absent, far away, withheld from them. And the more emotionally charged that absence becomes, the more firmly it is established as their present state. The problem is not prayer itself. The problem is posture. A beggar asks from below, a creator speaks from alignment. The universe does not respond to theatrical humility if the energetic message remains, I do not have, I am not enough. It is not here. Look carefully at the line from Mark 11:24. Whatever you ask for in prayer, believe that you have received it and it will be yours. That is not vague comfort. It is an instruction. It does not say ask and then tremble while waiting to see whether heaven approves. It says believe that you have already received. In other words, the emotional and energetic signature must come first. You do not pray toward possession. You pray from possession. For centuries, people have reversed the sequence and then wondered why the circuit never closes. This only sounds irrational if you remain trapped in linear time. But this book has already been building another model. If reality is not purely mechanical, and if the deeper field responds to state, then your desire does not begin at the moment you notice it. It already exists as a possibility, pattern, a version of life available in the larger field. The healthy version of you, the peaceful version, the loved version, the prosperous version. These are not fantasies in the childish sense. They are states not yet embodied in your present experience. The fatal word is want. The moment you say I want, you encode distance. You place yourself here and the desired life there, then spend your energy reinforcing the gap between the two. Wanting is often worshipped as passion, but vibrationally it can be a trap, because wanting says not yet. Wanting says missing. Wanting says separated. And once that becomes the dominant tone, the universe is only one coherent answer, more experience of not yet. The carrot stays in front of you because your own signal keeps insisting that it belongs in the future. Quantum prayer interrupts that pattern. It does not deny the current situation out of childish fantasy. It changes the point from which you relate to the desired reality. It removes the inner distance. It says, if abundance is the station, I stop talking about the station and turn the dial to it. If love is the frequency, I stop begging to hear it and align with it. Music is not produced by wishing at the radio. Music appears when tuning changes. This is why the phrase I am matters so much. Across mystical traditions, pure being is the closest language to the divine because it names existence before condition. I am is not just grammar, it is creative authority. Every time you say I am and then attach an identity to it, you are not merely describing yourself. You are programming your relationship to reality. Most people use that authority recklessly. I am exhausted. I am unlucky. I am broke. I am a mess. I am always alone. I am sick of my life. Then they wonder why those conditions keep finding structure around them. They are praying constantly, but against themselves. The universe does not stop to ask whether you meant it emotionally or whether you were just venting. The repeated identity begins to crystallize. That is why what follows, I am, must be treated with respect. This does not mean you lie to yourself in a cartoonish way. It means you stop sealing your present difficulty into permanent identity. Instead of I'm sick, you shift the code. My body is moving toward healing. Health is returning. I'm available for restoration. Instead of I'm poor, you shift toward sufficiency, value, circulation, provision. The change may look semantic to an outside observer, but internally it is structural. One closes the field, the other opens it. The next reversal is gratitude. Ordinarily, gratitude comes after the event. The gift arrives, you open it, you approve of it, then you say thank you. Cause first, gratitude second. Quantum prayer reverses the order because gratitude is more than politeness. It is a signature. When genuine gratitude is present, the body changes state. Studies on gratitude and emotional regulation repeatedly show measurable effects on mood, stress reduction, and social connection, and research from institutes studying heart-brain interaction, including HeartMath, has long argued that elevated emotional states such as appreciation produce a more coherent physiological rhythm. Whether one accepts every claim made in those circles or not, the practical point remains. Gratitude alters the body's signal. It feels like completion. It feels like it is already here. That is why gratitude before the event is so powerful. It tells the system the experience has already been accepted. It says the package is not missing. It is arriving or already mine at the level that matters first. If you can feel sincere relief before the interview, before the contract, before the relationship materializes, before the healing is visible and full, you have changed the emotional architecture through which the event is being received. You are no longer sending desperation into the field. You are sending coherence. And coherence is easier for reality to organize around than panic. There is another distinction the old model gets wrong: asking versus decreeing. A beggar asks because he assumes authority is elsewhere. A king decrees because he acts from rightful alignment. This is not egoic arrogance. It is not stomping around ordering heaven to behave. It is the difference between weakness and spiritual adulthood. When Jesus healed in the gospel stories, he did not approach reality with timid uncertainty. He spoke with command: rise, walk, be opened. The point is not imitation of religious theater. The point is energetic precision. Doubt fractures the signal. Clarity concentrates it. A decree is not louder than a prayer. It is cleaner. It does not whine. It does not negotiate against itself. It does not secretly prepare for disappointment while pretending to hope. It states what is true at the level you are choosing to align with. The perfect opportunity opens. The right home receives me. The exact support required is now moving toward me. I am available for love that is healthy, mutual, and alive. This is not controlling the universe with ego. It is ending the habit of speaking as though you are permanently cut off from what belongs to your path. But words alone are weak when the body beneath them tells a different story. This is where many affirmations collapse. Someone repeats, I am wealthy, I am wealthy, I am wealthy, while the stomach stays knotted and the nervous system vibrates with unpaid bills, fear, and contraction. The universe does not respond to the surface sentence if the deeper signal is opposite. Greg Braden and others in the modern spiritual physics space have repeated a useful idea here: the feeling is the prayer. Whether one agrees with every framework attached to that statement, principle itself is hard to deny. Emotion is not decoration. Emotion is carrier wave. If you want the prayer to function, you do not merely pronounce the result. You rehearse the state of the result, and this requires honesty. If your debt were finally paid, would you feel wild ecstasy every hour? Probably not. More likely you would feel relief, spaciousness, a looseness in the chest, the quiet exhale of a problem no longer pressing on the nervous system. Then that is the state to generate. If the relationship were real, stable, loving, would you feel drama? Probably not. You would feel warmth, safety, settled joy, less performance. Then that is the state to practice. The field responds less to the fantasy image and more to the emotional truth of completion. There is also a place where the rational ego sabotages the whole process: the obsession with how. This is where prayer gets micromanaged to death. A person says they want abundance, but immediately chains it to one route: lottery, promotion, one person, one company, one offer, one exact timeline. In doing so, they narrow an infinite field to the width of their current imagination. They define not only the what, but the logistics, the packaging, the schedule, and then wonder why life feels resistant. Your role is the what and the why. The universe's role is the how and the when. The smaller your field of permission, the more doors you close with your own hands. Perhaps the money comes through an idea you do not yet have, a collaboration you were not expecting, a redirection that first looks like inconvenience. Perhaps the relationship arrives through a chain of events you would never have chosen if you had been given the map in advance. The need to control the route is often just fear wearing the mask of strategy. Release the route and the field becomes intelligent again, and sometimes asking is not even the right move. Sometimes the blockage is not lack of request, but accumulation of old signal, old hurt, old guilt, old memory patterns, old internal contracts. That is why cleaning prayers matter. Ho'oponopono, for example, works less like demand and more like clearing. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. I love you. Thank you. Whatever one believes about its metaphysical origins, the structure is elegant: recognition, release, return to love, gratitude. In moments of confusion, when you do not know what to ask for and everything feels tangled, this kind of prayer does not force a new outcome. It clears contaminated data so a new outcome can finally arrive. Then comes the trap of repetition. People think that asking daily with anxiety proves commitment, but often it proves disbelief. If you plant a seed and dig it up every morning to check whether it is growing, you are not helping it. You are killing it. If you place an order in a restaurant, you do not run into the kitchen every 3 minutes screaming the name of your dish. Repeated begging does not accelerate delivery. It announces mistrust. Make the prayer, feel it, release it. When the desire returns to mind later, do not start over from lack. Return to gratitude. Thank you. It is underway. Thank you. It is cared for. That keeps the field coherent instead of disturbed. And the contrast between the old style and the new could not be clearer. The old style says, I am alone. I am suffering. Please send someone. I cannot bear this emptiness. Why am I not chosen? Even when the request is understandable, the field it generates is loneliness, need, victimhood, self-abandonment. The creator style sounds different because it feels different. Love is natural to me. The right partner already exists within the larger field. I welcome a relationship that is healthy, joyful, reciprocal, and sacred. I feel the warmth of companionship already entering my life. I am ready to receive and ready to recognize what is true. One leaves you emptier after speaking it. The other leaves you fuller. That difference is not cosmetic. It is magnetic. Because desperation repels. It carries the odor of lack. Coherence attracts because it no longer begs reality to complete it. It becomes the kind of state reality can build on. And that is the shift this chapter asks of you. Stop kneeling internally before your own desire, as if it were something above you, withholding itself from a smaller life. Stand inside the state. Speak from receipt, not starvation. Pray as though you finally understand that the mirror does not reward pleading. It reflects identity. And the moment you change the identity from beggar to creator, the conversation with the universe changes with it. Chapter 6. Emotion is fuel. The magnetic secret. The reason your goals don't move forward is simple. Your mind is asking for change, but your body is still loyal to the past. That conflict is quiet, almost invisible, which is why it survives for years without being questioned. On the surface, everything looks correct. You set intentions, you visualize outcomes, you repeat the right phrases, you plan carefully. But underneath that layer, your nervous system keeps returning to the same emotional baseline it has memorized through repetition. And the system does not reorganize around what you occasionally think. It reorganizes around what you consistently feel. Thought gives direction. Emotion gives momentum. Without momentum, direction becomes irrelevant. You can enter the exact destination into a navigation system, but if the engine never receives usable fuel, nothing moves, no matter how accurate the map appears. That is the gap most people never close, because they assume clarity is enough, when in reality, clarity without energy is inert. This is where the distinction between electrical and magnetic signals becomes useful, not as abstract theory, but as a practical model. Thought operates like an electrical impulse. Fast, precise, informational. It defines what you are pointing toward. Emotion behaves more like a magnetic field, slower, heavier, and far more influential in determining what actually comes into alignment with you. Research popularized by the HeartMath Institute suggests that the heart produces a measurable electromagnetic field significantly stronger than the brain's. And while the exact ratios are often simplified in popular discussions, the implication is clear enough. What you feel persistently has more organizing power than what you think briefly. So when there is a mismatch, the outcome is predictable. The stronger signal wins. You say you want stability, but your body is conditioned to expect disruption. You say you want connection, but your system is trained to anticipate loss. You say you want expansion, but your baseline state is contraction. In each case, the emotional pattern overrides the cognitive intention, not because the mind is weak, but because the body is consistent. And consistency shapes reality. This is why affirmations fail when they are disconnected from internal state. Repeating, "I am abundant," while the body remains tense, guarded, and uncertain, creates a split signal. It is like accelerating and braking at the same time. Energy is generated, but direction cancels out. Over time, that friction leads to frustration, not movement. The issue is not that the method is false. The issue is that the signal is incoherent. To understand why fear often manifests more efficiently than desire, you have to look at intensity. Fear is not effective because it is negative. It is effective because it is sustained, immersive, and charged. When someone fears losing something important, they do not think about it casually. They replay it, imagine it vividly, feel it physically, and return to it repeatedly throughout the day. Their entire system becomes aligned around that possibility. That is not weakness, that is focus. And focus, combined with emotional intensity, produces results. The system does not filter based on what you prefer. It responds to what you reinforce. Where attention and emotion converge, patterns strengthen. And when those patterns are reinforced long enough, they begin to shape outcomes in ways that feel external but are internally generated. So the question becomes more precise. What emotional state are you rehearsing most often? Because that state is not neutral. It is instructive. Not all emotions carry the same effect. Some states expand the system: gratitude, relief, calm, openness, steady confidence. Others contract it: fear, shame, resentment, chronic stress. Expansion allows information, connection, and possibility to move through the system more easily. Contraction narrows perception and reinforces limitation. You cannot generate consistent forward movement from a chronically contracted state. That is why sequence matters. State first, then intention. Trying to force results from an unstable internal condition produces distorted outcomes. It is not a matter of belief. It is a matter of coherence. When the system is aligned, even subtle signals carry weight. When it is fragmented, even strong effort dissipates. This connects directly to what you have already seen. Silence clears interference. The body detects truth before the mind organizes it. Prayer fails when it is rooted in lack. Emotion is the mechanism that either integrates or disrupts all of that. So the practical question is not how to think better. It is how to condition the body differently. And that is not done through denial or exaggeration, but through controlled exposure to new states. The brain and body respond to vividly imagined experience in ways that mirror actual events. This is not speculation. It is supported by decades of research in neuroscience and performance psychology. Mental rehearsal activates neural pathways, alters emotional responses, and changes behavior over time. But the key is not the image, it is the feeling attached to it. If the desired outcome were already real, what would remain in the body? Not excitement in most cases, but relief. A reduction in pressure, a shift in breathing, a sense of stability. That is the state you train, not the fantasy, but the internal condition that would exist after the outcome is secured. You are not forcing the external event, you are stabilizing the internal state that matches it. And gratitude is often the most direct way to access that state. It does not require exaggeration. It does not depend on circumstance. It simply shifts attention toward what is already working, even in small ways. That shift changes physiology, heart rhythm, breath, hormonal balance, and reduces internal resistance. It is difficult to sustain fear and genuine appreciation at the same time. The system begins to reorganize. Now consider the opposite pattern: need. It appears similar to desire, but it behaves differently. Need carries urgency, pressure, and attachment. It signals absence, not alignment. When someone says, "I need this," the underlying state is often tension, and tension repels rather than attracts. A more stable position is different. It acknowledges preference without collapsing into dependency. I want this, it matters, but my stability does not depend on immediate outcome. That state is not passive. It is controlled, and control allows movement. This does not mean eliminating lower emotions. Suppressing them only embeds them deeper into the system. Emotion is energy, and energy must be processed, not denied. Anger can become direction. Sadness can become depth. Fear can become awareness. The issue is not the presence of these states, but the duration and dominance they hold. You do not need to jump from contraction to expansion instantly. You move incrementally, from tension to awareness, from awareness to slight release, from release to neutrality, from neutrality to openness. That progression is realistic and sustainable. Once a more stable state is reached, it must be maintained. External inputs constantly influence internal condition, media, conversation, environment. If those inputs remain unfiltered, the system reverts. This is not philosophical, it is behavioral. Input shapes state, and state shapes output. So protection becomes part of the process. Not avoidance, but selection. What you expose yourself to repeatedly becomes your baseline, and your baseline becomes your signal. At that point, the mechanism becomes clear. Emotion is not secondary to thought. It is the force that determines whether thought has any effect. Most people adjust direction without ever addressing propulsion. They refine what they want, but ignore what they feel, and then they wait for change. But change follows energy, and energy follows emotion. So the shift is precise. Stabilize the state, align the signal, then the system responds. Not instantly, but inevitably. Chapter 7. Words of Power. Abracadabra. You've been casting spells all your life. You just never realized they were working. Abracadabra was never meant to be a joke, never meant to belong to children's tricks or cheap illusions. Its root comes from ancient Aramaic, and its meaning is direct, almost unsettling in its simplicity. I create as I speak. Not imagine, not hope. Create, and that changes everything, because it means your voice is not describing reality. It is shaping it in real time. You wake up and say, "I'm so tired. Today is going to be terrible," and it feels harmless, almost automatic. But a signal has already been sent. You check your bank account and mutter, "I never have money," and it sounds like frustration, but it functions as instruction. You tell someone, "People always disappoint me," and it feels like experience, yet it becomes expectation. Then the day unfolds exactly along those lines, and you call it bad luck. It isn't bad luck, it's alignment. You have been ordering your reality with precision, but without awareness. So the problem is not fate. The problem is language. Before turning this into something mystical, bring it back to mechanics. Sound is vibration. Every word you speak is a physical wave traveling through space, interacting with matter, including your own body. The experiments of Masaru Emoto, though debated, illustrate a principle that has remained compelling. Words and intention appear to influence the structure of water when frozen. Water labeled with love forms harmonious patterns. Water exposed to hate forms chaotic ones. You are mostly water. Your brain is mostly water. So each sentence you repeat is not disappearing into air. It is interacting with the very medium that makes you. When you say, "I look terrible, I'm getting worse," nothing ever works. You are not venting. You are structuring. Structuring your internal environment, structuring your nervous system, structuring your perception of what is possible. And not only yourself. Your tone shapes the emotional field of your home, your relationships, even the way others respond to you. Words are not light, they are weight. Each phrase becomes a brick. Over time, those bricks become walls, and those walls become the place you live inside. If you build with fear, complaint, and doubt, you construct a narrow space. If you build with clarity, direction, and grounded confidence, you construct something entirely different. Now look at where those words pass through. The throat. Not symbolically, but functionally. It sits between the mind and the body, between thought and emotion, acting as a channel through which the invisible becomes audible. If that channel is distorted through suppression, dishonesty, constant noise, or careless speech, then what passes through it becomes distorted as well. You think one thing, feel another, say something else, or you speak constantly but without coherence. In both cases, the signal weakens, and weak signals don't reorganize reality. Clear signals do. This is why the misuse of language is rarely dramatic, it is repetitive. Complaining. Complaining feels like release, but it is reinforcement. Each complaint validates what you don't want and anchors your attention to it. Neurologically, repetition strengthens pathways. The more you complain, the easier it becomes to find new things to complain about. You become efficient at detecting problems, and the system adapts to that efficiency. It gives you more material, not as punishment, but as continuity. So a person who constantly talks about what's wrong will never run out of things to confirm it. This is why removing complaint changes your energy so quickly. Not because reality suddenly becomes perfect, but because you stop feeding the loop. You stop reinforcing the same structure. Silence, in that moment, becomes power, not absence, control. Now consider the most powerful structure in language, I am. What follows those words becomes identity, and identity is not neutral. It organizes perception, behavior, and expectation. If you say, "I am bad with money," your system stops searching for solutions. If you say, "I am unlucky," your attention filters toward proof. If you say, "I am tired," your body aligns with it. The system does not debate, it executes. That is why attaching identity to problems locks them in place. Saying, "I am sick," fuses the condition to who you are. Saying, "I am experiencing illness," creates space. One defines you, the other describes a temporary state. That difference determines whether change feels possible. So language must be exact, not exaggerated, not dramatic, exact. There are also smaller words that quietly sabotage direction. Try weakens commitment. I'll try already contains an exit, but cancels everything before it. I want this, but shifts the focus immediately to limitation. Hopefully removes agency. I hope it works places the outcome outside you. I can't shuts down problem solving entirely. Each one seems harmless. Together they reshape your trajectory. So the correction is subtle but decisive. Replace try with I will. Replace but with and. Replace hopefully with I choose or I trust. Replace I can't with I don't know how yet. You are not being positive, you are being precise. Now there is another dimension most people ignore: silence. Speaking consumes energy, and premature speech disperses it. When you share something too early, a plan, a goal, a new direction, you release the internal pressure that would have driven it forward. The brain registers expression as partial completion. The urgency fades, and something that could have grown quietly loses momentum. Silence, then, is not hiding. It is containment. It protects the signal while it strengthens. So not everything should be spoken immediately. Some things need to stabilize first, and once stabilized, words gain weight. Now shift to writing. Writing is not just recording, it is imprinting. It slows thought, forces clarity, and connects intention to physical action. That is why writing your desired reality in present tense carries effect, not because of magic, but because it increases coherence. It aligns thought, emotion, and movement into a single direction. You are no longer thinking loosely, you are defining deliberately, and definition shapes execution. At the highest level, language becomes directive, not reactive. There is a difference between saying something positive and issuing a clear internal command. The difference is not volume, it is alignment. When your words match your internal state, the signal becomes coherent. And coherent signals influence behavior, perception, and outcomes in a way scattered ones never do. So the shift is not about speaking more, it is about speaking with awareness. Because every sentence is doing one of two things: reinforcing what already exists or constructing what comes next. And once you see that clearly, you stop speaking casually. Because you realize something difficult to ignore. You are not just talking about your life, you are programming it, one sentence at a time. Chapter 8. The Invisible Council, Guides, Angels, and Ancestors. The biggest illusion isn't that you're alone, it's that you believe your life is being managed by only one mind. Look at any complex system, a company, a city, even a human body, and you never find a single point of control operating in isolation. There are layers, specialists, feedback loops, invisible coordination happening beneath the surface. Yet when it comes to life decisions, most people operate as if everything depends solely on their conscious thinking, as if they are a lone operator trying to manage an entire system without support. That assumption collapses quickly when pressure rises, because the moment uncertainty appears, the mind hesitates, loops, second guesses, and starts solving problems far outside its bandwidth, while ignoring signals that do not fit its logic. The idea of the self-made individual sounds powerful, but structurally it makes no sense. No CEO runs a corporation by refusing input, ignoring advisors, and handling every subsystem alone. Doing so would not signal strength, it would signal dysfunction. Yet that is exactly how most people live. They try to solve emotional, relational, financial, and existential problems using only conscious reasoning, while filtering out everything that doesn't present itself as linear or verbal. But reality doesn't operate only through linear channels. There are layers of input, subtle, indirect, non-verbal, that guide behavior, timing, and perception, whether acknowledged or not. Call it intuition, pattern recognition, inherited memory, subconscious processing, or something beyond language. The label changes, but the mechanism remains. You are not operating alone inside your own system. From the moment you begin interacting with the world, you are already influenced by multiple streams of information, some immediate, some learned, some inherited, some emerging without clear origin. The problem is not absence of guidance. The problem is misinterpretation. Most people either ignore these signals entirely, or they misread them, projecting fear, desire, and expectation onto them. So the issue is not access, it is calibration. Think of it this way: in any organization, not every signal should be escalated to the highest level. If something breaks, you do not call the top authority, you address the layer responsible for that function. The same principle applies spiritually. People say, "I asked the universe," or "I prayed to God," and that is fine. The source remains the source. But in the daily management of life, the source delegates. If a pipe bursts in your home, you do not call the head of state, you call a plumber. If you have a legal problem, you call a lawyer. Specialization is not contradiction, it is efficiency. And the same is true here. Your invisible team, in the language of this chapter, has departments. The broad structure is simple: angels, guides, and ancestors. For some people, there is a fourth category, more distant from ordinary life, but relevant to consciousness itself. But first, the primary three. Begin with angels. Forget the sentimental Renaissance image, soft-faced cherubs with little wings and decorative harps. That image is psychologically comforting, but metaphysically useless. Angels, in this framework, are not human personalities floating in the air. They are intelligences of function, frequencies, messengers. The Greek root angelos means exactly that, messenger. They are not emotional in the human sense. They do not gossip, do not get offended, do not need validation, do not bargain. Their nature is more like glow and mood, more like a beam than a biography. That is why people often describe their presence as clean, intense, almost geometric. The guardian angel, in this map, is the most immediate, personal, constant. A protective intelligence assigned to your life, not as a therapist or philosopher, but as a bodyguard. Its role is not to make every day comfortable, but to ensure that certain boundaries are not crossed before their time. That sudden internal command just before an accident, the inexplicable stop, the break in the pattern that saved you before logic caught up, Many traditions would identify that as protective intervention. You do not need to summon this presence every morning. Protection is already on duty. Then come the archangels, which in this symbolic bureaucracy function like department heads. Different traditions assign them different rays, colors, and areas of action, but the structure remains consistent. Michael is linked to protection, courage, severing toxic ties. Raphael to healing, physical, emotional, restorative. Gabriel to communication, expression, writing, announcements, revelation. Samuel to love, relationship, and the recovery of what feels lost. Uriel to provision, stability, clarity, peace of mind, intelligent solutions around material life. Whether one takes those associations literally or archetypally, the practical principle is the same. Different forms of help carry different qualities, and naming the qualities sharpens the call. People often say the atmosphere changes when that call is made. Pressure shifts, temperature shifts, the room feels denser or clearer or suddenly more still. That matters because not all guidance feels the same. Now contrast angels with guides. Guides, unlike angels, have lived. That is their advantage. They know cold, grief, shame, confusion, hunger, heartbreak, failure, and doubt, not as concepts, but as conditions once endured directly. That makes them different kinds of advisors. Angels operate like pure function. Guides operate like earned wisdom. They understand the terrain because they have crossed it. They know what a human collapse feels like from the inside. That is why they are often experienced less as force and more as companionship. Most traditions that work with this model describe a primary guide who stays for life, and secondary guides who come and go according to task and stage. A person entering medicine may draw guidance aligned with healing and study. A person entering art may draw guidance aligned with creation and expression. Their communication style differs as well. They rarely shout. They communicate through ideas that arrive complete, through synchronistic books, through certain phrases that seem to find you at the right hour, through a wise interior thought that sounds calmer and older than your ordinary mind. They do not usually give orders. They leave clues. That distinction matters because real guidance respects free will. You are still the one at the table who decides. Which brings us to ancestors. Here, the structure becomes more intimate. If the lineage is only unconscious pain, then inheritance feels like burden. But once some of that inheritance is cleaned, as this framework would say, once the tree is no longer fully choked by old trauma, the ancestors stop appearing only as weight and begin functioning as strength. Blood becomes continuity. Not destiny in the rigid sense, but connection. No one has more invested in your forward movement than the line that continues through you. You are not separate from them. You are their extension into time. There are, however, different kinds of ancestral presences. Some are healed, luminous, at peace. These are sources of wisdom, protection, steadiness. If a grandfather carried business instinct, discipline, courage, or some honorable competence, invoking that memory before a meeting can organize the psyche in powerful ways, whether one interprets it spiritually or psychologically. Others died fragmented: addiction, violence, unresolved trauma, confusion. Those presences are not to be recruited for guidance. They are to be prayed for, offered light, remembered without surrendering your field to them. This is why practices like ancestor photos, a candle, a quiet altar, or a moment of acknowledgement exist in so many cultures. Not worship, continuity, a kept line, a telephone that remains connected. Many sensitives describe ancestral support as a semicircle behind the back, like a shield made of blood, memory, and benevolence. For some people, there is a fourth category. Not everyone resonates with it, but for those who do, it feels distinct from angels, guides, or ancestors. Call it star family, galactic lineage, higher order intelligences, Pleiadian, Sirian, Arcturian in the language used by many 5D communities. These presences, in that model, do not usually concern themselves with parking spots or mortgage timing. Their field is consciousness, mission, frequency, and energetic architecture. They are described less as caretakers of ordinary events and more as system engineers working on the larger pattern: DNA, sleep states, mission memory, the pressure to remember something beyond ordinary biography. That is why Chapter 4 matters here. Sleep is where many people report contact with this layer, not through daily logic, but through dreams, energetic work, or the strange Now the obvious objection appears. If there are so many helpers, why does pain still happen? Why heartbreak, poverty, confusion, illness, betrayal? Where were they then? This is where the golden rule enters. Free will. In this model, help does not erase agency. Guides and angels do not simply storm into your life, rearranging events because they think they know better. They are not permitted to override your path, except under very narrow conditions: mortal danger before an agreed time, protective intervention at threshold moments, or explicit permission given by you. They do not enter like invaders. They wait. That is why asking matters. Prayer, then, is not weakness, it is authorization. It is a legal opening in the field. When you say, "Help me," you are not collapsing into helplessness, you are signing consent. You are telling the system that intervention is invited. Without that permission, much remains observational rather than active. And this explains why many people move through life on hard mode, not because they are abandoned, but because they never open the door. The more natural that becomes, the less life feels like a single mind carrying impossible weight. There is a simple way to work with this directly. Picture a meeting room, a quiet office, a sacred cave, a boardroom built for clarity. Sit at the head of the table. You remain the decision maker. That matters. Then imagine the others entering, the main guide to one side, the guardian angel to the other, the wise ancestors behind, perhaps another specialist depending on your season. Lay out the agenda. Speak mentally if you like. Here is today's problem. Here is the fear. Here is the meeting I do not want. Here is the money pressure. Guide, give me the words. Grandfather, lend me your steadiness. Angel, protect the path. There are deceptive layers in the psyche and, in spiritual language, lower astral or parasitic forms that feed on confusion and fear. Whether you read that literally or psychologically, the test remains useful. A real guide does not terrify you. It does not shame you, flatter your ego, threaten punishment, or speak with violent urgency. Fear-heavy signals are either ego distortion or something lower. So test them. A genuine guide respects freedom. It suggests. It does not command like a tyrant. It clarifies. It does not coerce. Ask directly if needed. Do you come in the name of divine light? In many traditions, lower influences cannot hold coherence under that question. And above all, the emotional signature matters. Even correction from a true guide carries sweetness, sobriety, and peace, not humiliation. As the relationship strengthens, the field often becomes more tangible. And this is where many people get frightened unnecessarily. Temperature changes. A sudden cold current or a surrounding warmth. A scent with no obvious source. Tobacco, roses, perfume from a deceased relative. A touch on the shoulder, a movement near the hairline. A pressure that feels gentle rather than invasive. A ringing in the ear. A shift in the room. These experiences do not automatically prove anything dramatic. But within the logic of this chapter, they are signs of presence, signs that the system is becoming easier for you to detect. The useful response is not panic, it is acknowledgement. Hello, I know you're there, thank you. Recognition strengthens contact, because the real shift in this chapter is not toward superstition, it is toward intelligent cooperation. You remain the one who chooses, you remain responsible, free will remains intact. But the solitary model weakens, the closed boardroom CEO begins to look less admirable and more absurd. And once that illusion breaks, the whole system changes. Not because new help appears, but because you finally stop pretending that none was there. No one walks the earth alone. The question was never whether the council existed. The question was whether you were willing to open the door. Chapter 9. Inspired action prayer without movement is often just a beautiful form of delay. That sentence offends the part of the mind that wants spirituality to remove effort, risk, and responsibility, but it exposes one of the most common distortions in this work. People ask, visualize, align, affirm, meditate, wait for signs, and then sit motionless, secretly hoping the universe will do the physical part for them while they remain protected from uncertainty. It does not work that way. It never did. Imagine a person sitting on a sofa, hungry enough to feel it in the stomach, closing their eyes and entering a perfect meditative state, seeing in exquisite detail a hot pizza, smelling the melted cheese, feeling gratitude for the meal as if it were already there, then opening their eyes and waiting for the doorbell to ring. 10 minutes pass. An hour passes. No pizza. Then comes the verdict. Manifestation is fake. The universe is silent, though the whole thing is nonsense. But from the other side, the answer would be almost absurdly simple. The hunger was the signal. The image was the signal. The phone in your hand was the signal. The thought to order was the signal. What you called nothing happening was actually you refusing the bridge between subtle guidance and physical result. This is the misunderstanding behind a great deal of modern spirituality. People think trust means passivity, when in reality, trust means cooperation. The universe provides energy, timing, intuition, synchronicity, and openings. You provide movement, matter, contact, application, risk. Co-creation means exactly that. Co-together. Without your step, the current has nothing to move through. This is why spiritual paralysis is so destructive. A person reads enough about surrender, flow, divine timing, and non-attachment that they begin treating action itself as low consciousness, as if effort were automatically ego and waiting were automatically wisdom. They wait for the relationship without leaving the house. They wait for the new job without sending the application. They wait for healing without changing diet, sleep, therapy, or environment. They call it faith. Most of the time it is fear dressed in spiritual language. It looks peaceful from the outside, but underneath it is avoidance. Matter still has to be moved, and matter moves through contact. This universe is not made only of intention. It is made of density. Density requires action. Prayer aligns the field. Visualization sharpens direction. Emotion magnetizes outcome. But something still has to pass through the hands, the feet, the voice, the calendar, the email, the conversation, the decision. Without that conduction channel, the subtle never enters the physical. The soul may want the mountain moved, but on earth the shovel still matters. That is where inspired action enters. Not all action is equal, and this is the nuance that confuses people. One kind of action is forced, born from panic, control, scarcity, and the need to make something happen before anxiety devours you. It feels heavy, tight, exhausting. You push on closed doors. You repeat strategies that are already dead. You call it discipline, but often it is fear with a schedule. The result is friction, burnout, mediocre returns, and the constant sense that you are rowing against the river. Inspired action feels different. It still requires courage. It still requires movement. It can still demand long hours and real commitment, but it carries a different texture. There is energy in it, curiosity, a strange inner click. Not I must do this or everything collapses, but I need to move on this now. It is the difference between dragging yourself toward a lifeless task and driving 5 hours to see someone you love, fully awake, fully willing, not because it is rationally efficient, but because the body, the heart, and the inner signal are aligned. That is why inspired action often looks illogical to the rational mind. You are washing dishes and suddenly think, I should call her. You have not spoken in years. The thought is oddly alive. The logical mind says that makes no sense. It's random. It can wait. So you don't call. What you fail to see is that this was not random at all. Perhaps she held the key to the next chapter of your life. Perhaps she needed help and you were the answer sent to her. Perhaps the call was not about her, but about the chain reaction that would have followed the call. By ignoring the impulse, you did not merely postpone an action. You broke a line of flow. That is how guidance often works. Not as a booming voice from the sky, but as a subtle recurring nudge. A place you suddenly want to go for no clear reason. A topic that lights up your chest. A strange desire to turn right instead of left. A gentle but persistent interior movement that does not argue, does not explain, does not disappear. It simply returns. This matters because the universe often opens windows in real time. Some opportunities are not permanent doors. They are exits on the highway. If the signal says turn and you keep driving because you want to think about it for another 2 hours, the exit is gone. This is why speed matters after recognition. Not frantic speed, obedient speed. Mel Robbins made popular what she called the 5-second rule, and stripped of branding. It is deeply useful here. When an action presents itself that is clean, alive, and intuitively right, the brain has only a short window before fear begins manufacturing reasons not to move. Embarrassment, doubt, delay, social judgment, imagined inconvenience. These rush in fast. If you act physically before the defense system closes, the current stays open. Count down if you must. Move before the argument thickens. Pick up the phone, send the message, walk out the door, raise your hand, buy the ticket. Start before fear organizes itself. Inspired action does not wait for certainty. Certainty is often the reward for motion, not the prerequisite. This is where Taoism offers a necessary correction through the concept of Wu Wei, often translated poorly as doing nothing. It does not mean laziness. It means unforced action, aligned action, action that works with the current rather than against it. A person can work 14 hours in a day and still be in Wu Wei if the work flows, if the energy is coherent, if the force is not self-violence. Another person can spend 1 hour answering email in total resistance and end the day spiritually bruised. The question is not how much action is happening. The question is, what kind? A river illustrates this better than a slogan. Swim hard against it, and you exhaust yourself, sometimes without gaining much ground. Float in alignment with it, and you move quickly with less strain, not because you are passive, but because you are cooperating with force instead of wasting yourself resisting it. Inspired action works like that. It is not inactivity. It is action with less unnecessary friction. That also means recognizing when a door is truly closed. If you knock 3 times, push, force, insist, and the thing still will not open, there is a point where persistence stops being strength and becomes deafness. Many people have been taught that struggle proves worthiness, that pain proves seriousness, that resistance means they must try harder. Often it means the path is wrong. The universe is not always testing your endurance. Sometimes it is redirecting you. A locked door may not be a challenge. It may be mercy. An open window nearby may require less ego, not less courage. Neville Goddard describes something useful here with his idea of the bridge of incidents, the chain of events that leads from the current state to the desired one. The bridge rarely looks like the wish itself. In fact, it often looks like disruption. You ask for a better job and get fired. Your ego screams betrayal. But from a wider angle, that loss may have been the first structural requirement for the new possibility to enter. You wanted a new chapter while still clinging to the old room. The bridge had to remove you. This is why apparent chaos is not always contradiction. Sometimes it is construction. A dinner invitation that seems irrelevant introduces the investor. A delay saves you from the accident. A long route turns out to be the living route. You do not see the entire map, but the system does not need you to see it. It only needs you to take the next accurate step. And those steps are often smaller than people expect. One of the most paralyzing things about desire is scale. The mind sees the whole mountain and freezes. But the universe almost never asks for the whole mountain today. It asks for a ridiculous step. Renew the passport, write 1 sentence, send 1 message, buy the notebook, register the domain, put on your shoes. A parked car cannot receive directions beyond route calculating. Motion activates guidance. Once the car moves, even if imperfectly, the GPS recalculates and begins to lead. Stillness keeps you theoretically safe and practically lost. So the right question is not always, what is the grand plan? Often it is, what is the smallest honest movement I can make today that proves I am available for what I say I want? That movement matters because it tells the field something words alone cannot say. I am preparing. I am making space. I am not only fantasizing, I am participating. Still, discernment remains necessary, because not every urge is inspired. Some action comes from fear. It feels urgent in the wrong way, tight, breathless, desperate, tied to outcome. I have to do this so disaster does not happen. That is not usually inspiration. That is escape. Intuitive action can still be scary, but the fear has a different taste. It is not collapse, it is expansion vertigo. The body may tremble, but the center remains intact. There is nervousness, yes, but also aliveness. If the feeling is pure terror and fragmentation, stop and regulate. If the fear comes with clarity and a strange current of yes, then you may be standing at the edge of growth. This is important because comfort is not the measure of alignment. Your desired life does not live inside the exact emotional architecture of your current one. Some threshold must be crossed, some skin must be shed. The universe will often ask you to move beyond the size of the self you have been rehearsing. And sometimes, the right action is no action at all. This is the part the Western mind hates most. There are seasons in manifestation, just as there are seasons in nature. Once the seed has been planted, through prayer, image, emotion, alignment, there are periods where digging it up every day to check progress only damages it. In those phases, active waiting is the action. Living well while the order is being prepared is the work. Going for a walk, enjoying your evening, taking care of the body, keeping your frequency clear, refusing anxious interference, this is not doing nothing. It is holding the field without contamination. Detachment is action when the seed is already in the ground. Indiana Jones gives a perfect picture of this. He stands at the edge of an abyss, no visible bridge. Logic says death. The instruction says leap of faith. He steps into empty space, and only then does the hidden bridge reveal itself beneath his foot. That is inspired action in its purest cinematic form. The bridge often does not appear first. The step reveals it. If you insist on foolproof before movement, you remain in 3D logic. If you move with real inner recognition, the structure emerges under the act. That is why the universe sometimes withholds the visible bridge. Not to torment you, to see whether you are willing to cooperate with what you already know. The crazy idea, the sudden turn, the resignation letter, the book you are meant to write, the city you are meant to move to, the conversation you are meant to have, the passion that keeps returning. The soul says move. The ego asks for diagrams. The universe waits, and it cannot place the floor under your feet until you lift your foot. That is the law. Pray as if everything depended on God. Work as if everything depended on you. Because in this strange and exact collaboration, both are true. Chapter 10. Radical Surrender. Thy will be done. The hardest truth in this entire journey is not that you are powerless. It is that your need to control has been exhausting you more than life itself. That is why surrender terrifies the ego. The moment it hears that word, it translates it through war, defeat, humiliation, the image of someone kneeling in the dirt under another person's command, forced to give up freedom in exchange for survival. But in the deeper language of reality, surrender has nothing to do with defeat. Surrender is the moment you stop fighting the river, as if the river were your enemy, and finally allow yourself to discover that the current was never trying to drown you. It was trying to carry you. Everything in this trilogy has prepared you for that point. You learn to clean the old lineage, to hear the body, to read signs, to pray from reception rather than need, to fuel your field with emotion, to use words carefully, to move when inspiration called, to ask for help from what is unseen. All of those are real tools, necessary tools. But tools belong to a stage. There comes a moment when the river widens, when the current grows stronger than your little private effort, and the very strategies that once served you begin to obstruct you. You do not need more force. You need less resistance. Think of a child sitting in the lap of an airplane pilot. The pilot knows the route, the altitude, the turbulence, the storm line, the destination, and the adjustments needed to reach it safely. The child, however, has a little plastic steering wheel in their hands, and because the plane turns when the real pilot turns, the child imagines that the toy wheel is doing the work. That is the human condition in one image. The ego believes it is flying the aircraft because it can feel movement while touching something that resembles control. It mistakes participation for authorship. Then the storm appears. The pilot knows the plane must rise above the clouds. The child sees only darkness and turbulence and wants to descend. The pilot ignores the toy wheel and climbs anyway, because love is sometimes experienced by the frightened mind as contradiction. The child cries, kicks, screams, feels betrayed, and says, "You're not listening to me." But the one who is truly flying the plane is not failing the child. He is saving them from the child's own limited perspective. That is how much of life feels from inside the ego. I want this person. I want that job. I want this timing. I want the weather to cooperate with my plan. And when reality refuses, we do not usually call it redirection. We call it abandonment. We enter a crisis of faith because we assume our tiny wheel was attached to the actual controls. Radical surrender begins when you realize that the toy wheel is not the mechanism of reality. It begins when you finally say, not with bitterness but with relief, "You know how to fly this better than I do." That phrase, "Thy will be done," has suffered terribly under fear-based religion. It was taught to people as if they were signing a contract for pain, as if divine will meant punishment, deprivation, blood, sacrifice, or the removal of everything they loved in order to make them holy. That is not surrender. That is terror dressed as piety. Erase that theology from your nervous system. If the universe is not fundamentally hostile, then its will cannot be the reduction of your being. If the source is expansion, then its movement for you is toward more life, not less, more freedom, not less, more truth, not less. So thy will be done does not mean, do whatever hurts me most because maybe I deserve it. It means, my small mind sees a few inches ahead, your intelligence sees the whole map. My little plan is limited by fear, habit, and short-term comfort. If your design for me is wider, truer, more abundant, I release my grip on the smaller script. That is resignation. It is optimization. The ego usually reaches this only after collapse, a breakup, a dismissal, a diagnosis, financial ruin. The season where every strategy fails, every technique feels dead, every effort becomes heavier than the problem itself, until finally a person ends up on the bathroom floor or in the car or awake at 3 in the morning saying, "I cannot do this anymore. I give up. Do what you want." And often in that exact moment, when the fight falls out of the body, something strange enters. Peace. Not victory as the ego imagined it, but release. The shoulders soften, the chest opens. The mind goes quiet. Nothing outside has changed yet, but the resistance has stopped. And because the resistance has stopped, light can finally pass through. Solutions arrive. Calls come. Symptoms shift. Doors open. Not because collapse was beautiful, but because collapse removed the barricade. The lesson is not that you must be broken to surrender. The lesson is that wisdom can do what suffering often does too late. You can surrender now. You can surrender while healthy, while strong, while still able to choose it consciously, before life is forced to pry your fingers off the false controls. And that surrender begins with one of the sweetest phrases the ego hates most. I don't know. I don't know how this will be solved. I don't know where this path leads. I don't know why this is happening yet. And I do not need to pretend that I do. The ego worships certainty, because certainty gives it the illusion of safety. It wants next month mapped, next year guaranteed, every emotional outcome secured in advance. But uncertainty is not always danger. In deeper reality, uncertainty is the field of possibility. It is the open sky before the form has hardened. And when you stop using all your mental energy to predict, prevent, and catastrophize, that energy does not disappear. It becomes presence. It becomes availability. It becomes peace. This is why surrender often makes a person lighter almost immediately. The general retires. The tourist awakens. No more trying to outthink the guide while also asking the guide to lead. Albert Einstein once framed the central question more clearly than most mystics. The deepest decision is whether you believe you live in a friendly universe or a hostile one. That decision shapes everything. If the universe is hostile, surrender is madness. It is dropping your weapons before an enemy. If the universe is benevolent, surrender is the most rational act available. It is relaxing backward into a net that has been holding you longer than you knew. There may be no scientific instrument yet that can prove benevolence as a cosmic property, but there are pragmatic proofs. People who trust tend to live differently. Their physiology softens, their timing changes, their perception widens. They get sick less from tension. They see opportunities sooner. They recover faster. They experience more synchronicity because their field is less occupied by war. Radical surrender rests on one working assumption. Even when it hurts, life is not fundamentally against me. Even when the tower falls, it may be because a prison is being torn down to make room for a truer home. That faith becomes practical through ritual. Otherwise, surrender remains an idea. One of the simplest rituals is what might be called the golden box. Take the problem that is eating your peace, the impossible bill, the relationship knot, the legal issue, the diagnosis, the fear that loops every night, and write it down. Then place it, physically or imaginally, into a golden box set apart in your inner life, and say, with full honesty, This is too large for my little mind. I have done what I know how to do. I cannot solve it by worrying, so I hand it over. The logistics are yours. My work now is to keep peace in my field. That last part is crucial, because surrender is not passive collapse into chaos. It is a division of labor. The management department handles the route. You handle the state from which you travel. And once the paper is in the box, you are forbidden to steal it back through rumination. When anxiety returns, as it will, you remind yourself, that file is no longer on my desk. It has been transferred. I will be notified if action is required. This sounds simple, but psychologically it is enormous. You are teaching the nervous system that vigilance is not love, and that obsession is not responsibility. Now comes one of the hardest forms of surrender: receiving no without betrayal. You ask, you trust, you pray, you release, and then the thing still does not arrive. Person marries someone else. The job goes to another applicant. The trip collapses. The contract dies. The ego immediately screams that surrender failed, that trust was foolish, that the universe cannot be trusted because it denied your request. But seen from a wider angle, many of the greatest rescues in life arrive disguised as refusals. If every prayer from your younger self had been granted, including the toxic lover, the wrong career, the short-term comfort that would have cost you your future, your life might be unrecognizable in the worst way. A closed door is often a hidden act of protection. A no can be a yes to something not yet visible, or a no to a danger your present intelligence could not detect. The mistake is clawing at the wood after the door has been sealed. Radical surrender says, "Thank you. I do not yet understand what I was spared or what larger design this refusal belongs to, but I trust your sight more than my whim." That trust opens the state the Taoists described so beautifully: effortless action, flow, movement without self-violence. In surrender, life no longer feels like something you are pushing uphill with your forehead. You become more like a dancer than a laborer, more like a musician being played by the music than a technician calculating every motion. This is not passivity. It is harmony. Athletes know it. Jazz musicians know it. Mystics know it. The self gets quiet and action begins to move through them with an intelligence greater than deliberate control. That, in the end, is the real goal. Not the Ferrari, not the perfect scoreboard, not the ego's decorated fantasy of success. The real goal is union. A state where happiness is no longer chained to possession, where presence is richer than acquisition, where you are no longer bargaining with life from a position of separation. Because radical surrender reveals the final joke hidden under all seeking. There was never really an isolated you down here, trying to contact some distant universe up there. The separation was instructional, necessary for the early lessons, but not final. At the end of the search, the wave realizes it has been shouting at the ocean for water. You are not outside the source, begging for contact. You are the source, focused into a human point of view. You are consciousness wearing skin. You are the universe experiencing itself as cold, frightened, hopeful, tender, ambitious, lost, found. When you ask for a sign, it is your deeper self leaving breadcrumbs for your smaller self. When synchronicity appears, it is eternity winking through time. When love opens in the chest, it is the divine recognizing itself through form. That is why surrender is the last lesson, because surrender removes the disguise. It ends the exhausting performance of separateness. It reveals that all along you were speaking upward to what was already inside, around, and through you. The universe was never absent. The line was never dead. The silence was never empty. The search ends not because you found some external throne at the top of the sky, but because you finally recognized the control room in your own being. Look at your hands. Look into the mirror. Listen to your heartbeat. There is the burning bush. There is the temple. There is the voice you thought was elsewhere. We began this journey by healing what was inherited. We moved through vibrations, signs, dreams, prayer, emotion, language, invisible help, and inspired action. The orphan crossed the landscape looking for the father, and discovered at the end not only the father, but the inheritance. You are not merely surviving inside reality, you are participating in its expression. You are no longer a cork drifting helplessly on a violent sea. You are the captain, you are the ship, and deeper still, you are the sea. So stop asking permission to live. Stop apologizing for radiance. Speak clearly. Love cleanly. Walk as if the ground is willing to form under your feet, because it often does. Life is not an exam set to trap you. It is a canvas handed to you by the same intelligence that became your hands. The brush is already there. The colors are already in your chest, and the universe is not standing apart from you waiting to judge the painting. It is inside the painting. It is painting through you. Welcome then, not to a new theory, but to your life. You are not waiting for the miracle. You are the miracle. Thank you for being here. If this resonated with you, subscribe to Book Sounds Better You and stay for the next video. It might arrive right when you need it most.